I'm an economics fan, the way some people are sports fans. I root for the free market team. Adam Smith is my star player. I've got all his memorabilia, The Wealth of Nations, The Theory of Moral Sentiment, The Division of Labor bobblehead doll. It's my hobby. I wrote a book about it. So, because I wrote a book about it, people ask me, what would Adam Smith say about this financial meltdown? Now, usually the people who ask me that, these are the people who are forgetting to remember that the free market is our greatest reserve of freedom. I mean, economic freedom is the freedom that we exercise the most and the most often and to the greatest extent. I mean, freedom of speech is important. If you have got anything to say, I've checked on the internet, nobody does. Freedom of belief is important. If you believe anything, I've watched cable television, I can't believe it. Freedom of assembly is important if you have an assembly to go to, the way we do tonight. But most people go to the mall, where they exercise economic freedom, right? But the free market is dead. The free market is dead. The free market was killed by the Bolshevik Revolution, by fascist central planning, by Keynesianism, by the Great Depression, by World War II economic controls, by the Arab oil embargo, by the labor victory of 1945, by Keynesianism again, by Tony Blair and Bill Clinton's third way economic policies, and by the current financial crisis. That is 10 times that the free market has died in the past 100 years. And every time the free market dies, everyone wants to know, what would Adam Smith say? It's a hi God, how's my atheism doing? You know, sort of moment. You know, what would Adam Smith say? He would be laughing too hard to say anything. You know, I mean, Smith spotted the cause of our financial disaster not just before 2008, but 232 years before 2008. Let me read a little passage from The Wealth of Nations, published in 1776. A dwelling house, as such, wrote Smith, contributes nothing to the revenue of its inhabitant. And Smith went on to point out that even if the house is rented, quote, as the house itself can produce nothing, the tenant must always pay the rent out of some other revenue. So Smith concluded, and I quote, the revenue of the whole body of the people can never be in the smallest degree increased by a bunch of ugly condominiums and tacky housing developments. He didn't quite put it that way. But subprime mortgage meltdown, there you have it. You know? Adam Smith knew about speculative bubbles. The South Sea bubble, the Mississippi scheme, which was the French version of the same thing, these had blown up just a couple of years before Smith was born. The speculative bubbles of the early 18th century, they were part of Smith's intellectual DNA. I mean, and you know, there were at least 100 other bubbles besides the famous South Sea bubble and Mississippi frauds. There were bubbles all over the place. And one of them had, as its complete prospectus, a statement that a company was being formed to, quote, for carrying on an undertaking of great advantage, but nobody to know what it is. That's a credit swap, collateralized debt obligation if I ever saw one. So for Europeans of Adam Smith's generation, the speculative bubble, this was a defining disaster of economic history for them. This was what the Great Depression is to us, except that they lacked a Hitler with a huge economic stimulus package of World War II to help them out. Furthermore, while Smith was in Scotland writing The Wealth of Nations, there was a collapse in a land price boom that set off a run on Scottish banks. And in the midst of writing the Wealth of Nations, only 3 of Edinburgh's 30 private banks would survive. And then the reaction of the Scottish investors to this sounds very familiar. Smith wrote that the speculators seem to have thought that, quote, the banks were in honor bound to supply the deficiency and to provide the speculators with all the capital which they wanted. You know? Smith knew that speculative bubbles are not caused by the free market. Speculative bubbles are the result of a breakdown in something. Sometimes a breakdown in common sense, sometimes a breakdown in rule of law, but they're not the result of a breakdown in market freedoms. The free market, it's not a creed or a belief system that we capitalists are asking people to take on faith. The free market is a measurement. The free market tells us what people are willing to pay for a given item at a given moment. That's what the free market does, and that's all the free market does. It gives us one piece of information, but it's a very important piece of information, and we ignore it at our peril, like the leaders of the old Soviet Union did. They lost the Cold War, not because of tanks or troops or missile shields. They lost the Cold War because of Bulgarian blue jeans. The free market was trying to tell the Kremlin, Bulgarian blue jeans suck. Nobody wants them at any price. They won't wear Bulgarian blue jeans. They won't wear Bulgarian blue jeans to save their lives. The Kremlin wouldn't listen, and the Berlin Wall came down. Yeah? Free market, the free market's a bathroom scale. We may not like what we see when we step on that bathroom scale. We may go, geez, 230 pounds, but we cannot pass a law making ourselves weigh 185. And socialists and fools, to the extent that there's a difference between the two, think we can. Think we can. So how would Adam Smith fix our financial crisis? Well, sorry, it's fixed already. The answer to a decline in the value of speculative assets is to pay less for them. Job done. You know, we're fixed it. It's all over. Now, we could pump the banks full of our national treasure, but Smith said, to attempt to increase the wealth of any country, either by introducing or by detaining in it an unnecessary quantity of gold and silver, is as absurd as it would be to attempt to increase the good cheer of private families by obliging them to keep an unnecessary number of kitchen utensils. We could send the experts in to manage some sort of bailout, but Smith said, I've never known much good done by those who affect to trade for the public good. And we could nationalize our economies, but Smith said, the state cannot be very great, of which the sovereign has leisure to carry on the trade of a wine merchant or apothecary, not to mention chairman of General Motors. So, meltdown of 08, 09, what is the G20 going to do? What sort of G-forces are we going to be subjected to? Ronald Reagan summed up our problem in one sentence. He said the 9 most frightening words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help.